Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are taking a look at the Week 4 picks for the Overwatch League. We have a lot of APAC matches this weekend, 4 days of APAC matches. Some teams have to play a game all 4 days, which stinks for those teams, so good luck to them. We're going to jump in and we're going to talk about all of the matches for this week. The final week before the qualifiers, which means next week we get to make some bracket predictions for both the APAC and Western region. But for now, we're going to take a look at where the teams are heading into the final weekend of the Kickoff Clash Qualifiers and give you my predictions for who I think is going to win those matches. So let's jump into the first game of the weekend. We have the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Seoul Dynasty. Don't know if this has ever happened before, but this is my first big pick game for the weekend. Very interesting to me, this one, because I think that the Fusion look to be one of the top teams in the APAC region, and potentially in the league this past weekend. But I don't know if that was just kind of a factor of them having a really good week 1 where they got to play, a game against Shanghai that Shanghai didn't look very comfortable, and then they got to play a relatively easy game against the Guangzhou Charge. This weekend, we will really kind of know where the Fusion are at. They have to play Seoul, they have to play Chengdu, they have to play the Hangzhou Spark, and these are teams we kind of feel pretty good about going forward. So, to me, this is a really tough one to pick. I don't really know who to go with here. There's another game that the Fusion have later in the week that I think is also a little more difficult to pick, but Seoul is just interesting. They sometimes look like one of the best teams in the league, and sometimes they look doo-doo, so they really are a bizarre team to kind of pick. But I think it'll be close. Carpe and Prophet, two of the most legendary players in the league, potentially facing off in this one. I'm going to go the direction of the Fusion, though, a score of 3-2. I think it'll be close. I think both of these teams look good. It's just a question of who looks better when push comes to shove. And right now, I think the Fusion look to be the better team. Next is the Hangzhou Spark versus the Chengdu Hunters. I've said my piece on Chengdu pretty extensively over the past several weeks that I don't think this team is very flexible, but I think if the meta continues to be Genji favored, if they can get away with playing stuff like Genji Soldier or, Tracer, Echo, whatever, specifically kind of Genji-based compositions, I think the Chengdu team will look decent. I think the Hangzhou Spark have been a relatively good-looking team. Of course, they've been trying to play a lot of Genji. They've been playing some Ashe Echo for whatever reason. I don't really know why they opted for that composition. So this is another interesting matchup here. I've been pretty high on the Spark based on what we saw from them last week. They could have beaten the Shanghai Dragons. We could have been talking about an 0-2 Dragons team at this point in time. But the Spark did ultimately fail in that match. They had a pretty close series against the LA Valiant as well. They're a tough team to really place, but I do feel pretty good about the Spark, all things considered. And I think they will take this match, though I think it'll be close. I think the Spark made some questionable decisions putting Gushue in. I think they made some decisions that did kind of have that Hangzhou Spark history kind of feel to them. But I do think they look better right now than the Chengdu Hunters do, so I'm going to go the direction of the Spark in this one with a 3-2 win for them. Final match on Thursday is the Guangzhou Charge taking on the Shanghai Dragons. I don't think this one will be particularly close. I think the Dragons just look like the better team right now, and I think that they are going to take this one by a score of 3-0. Charge have not inspired much confidence in me. They did beat the Valiant, but I thought they looked worse as the week went on. And so to me, I'm going to go with the Shanghai Dragons to take this one 3-0. Moving on to Friday, back to the APAC region, because there are no Western region matches for Friday. We have the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Chengdu Hunters. I think the Fusion should be pretty heavily favored in this series. I don't think the Hunters have shown enough, and I think, like I said, they are not super flexible, so I feel like they have limitations that will hold them back in this series. The Fusion, I feel confident about. MN3 and Zest both look very, very good. I think that the ability to have either Fury or Bellisria in there on that tank role is very, very big, and so I think the Fusion take this one by a score of 3-1. Seoul Dynasty taking on the Guangzhou Charge is the second game on Friday. I think the Dynasty should be favored in this one relatively heavily. Maybe not as much as the Fusion are over the Hunters, but I think the Dynasty look pretty good. The Charge, to me, look like the weakest team in this region. Yes, they beat the Valiant last week, but the Valiant looked improved as the week went on. I thought that the Charge looked worse and worse as the week progressed. I don't know what the Charge's identity is. They played a lot of Rio. I think they really should be heavily investing into Krong. I think he is the better player on that roster in that tank role. And I think that he would make this team ultimately stronger, but they just, for whatever reason, love Rio and keep playing him. Seoul, I think, has some limitations as well. I don't think they look great in terms of tank flexibility, but when they can play to their comfort roles, which I think they can against a Charge roster that just is not as good, the Dynasty shouldn't have much trouble. So I think the Dynasty take this one 3-1. I'll give the Charge a map, but I don't even know if it'll be that close. Final APAC match on Friday is the LA Valiant taking on the Shanghai Dragons. Last season's worst team in the league versus last season's best team in the league. Both of these teams look very different from last season. Shanghai didn't look amazing week one. I thought they looked better with Fate in as opposed to Void, which is kind of surprising considering the off-tank meta seems to be the dominant one right now. They also didn't play a very strong opponent in their second outing last weekend. You know, they played a decent Spark team, actually, so I take that back. I forgot they played the Spark. They've had a Spark team who looked pretty good. They almost actually lost to the Spark, so it was an interesting out of series from them, but I think they look better with Fate, despite the fact that off-tanks have been kind of better right now. I thought the Valiant looked improved throughout the week. They almost beat the Spark, so if you kind of use the rule of equivalent exchange, these two teams should be relatively close together. The Dragons should just be a little bit better than the Spark, but I think it will be a win for the Dragons. Somewhat one-sided series, so I do think the Valiant will take one map, and the Dragons will take the series by a score of 3-1. Friday in the Western region kicks off with the London Spitfire taking on the Los Angeles Gladiators. I don't feel super confident in this Spitfire roster after last weekend. Thought they had a chance to look okay, and they disappointed me. They did not look very good against Houston Outlaws. Gladiators, 2 back-to-back reverse sweep losses has to be very painful for these players. I imagine that they are looking to bounce back and not suffer that same fate. Again, I think they're going to go for a relatively clean look this weekend. I don't like predicting 3-0s, so I will give the Spitfire a map in this one, but I think the Gladiators take this one 3-1. I think they just look better than the Spitfire do. I don't think the Spitfire are really much competition for the Gladiators, and so the Gladiators, in my opinion, take this series 3-1. Next is the Toronto Defiant taking on the New York Excelsior. You already know where I'm going with this. The NYXL have hurt me too much. I think this team looks terrible. I think they arguably have the worst support line in the league right now. I have zero confidence in anything this team does. They literally rely on Yaki to drag a corpse behind him, which is the rest of the roster, and hope it works. It is not a proven success strategy, so I think the Toronto Defiant take this one 3-0. They look better, they feel better, they look more consistent. New York Excelsior, I think, are terrible, and I think arguably are a worse team than the Paris Eternal, and might only be better than the Vancouver Titans in this region, and maybe even the league as a whole. And so I'm going to throw Defiant this one relatively big 3-0 win. Even though I just said only predicting 3-0s, I think this will be a 3-0. Final match on Friday, San Francisco Shock take on the Vancouver Titans. Oh, how great this rivalry once was, and oh, how terrible it is now. Shock will take this one. They will take it 3-0. There is no question in my mind. Titans have some talent, but just have not really had an identity. They have not figured out what they are. And so I think it is going to be a relatively large win for the Shock. 3-0 in my opinion for the Shock over the Vancouver Titans. Moving on to Saturday in the APAC region, the Guangzhou Charge take on the Hangzhou Spark. I think the Spark look good. I think the Charge do not look very good. I think the Charge should not be favored at all in this series. I think the Spark should take this one pretty easily. I think a 3-0 is likely to happen here. I just think the Charge have not really inspired me much. I think that outside of Faraway and Choisewan, they have been pretty mid. I don't think they have really figured out what they want to be, where they want to play, how they want to play, and I think the Spark, other than the, changes in the tank role, have looked very consistent, and so I am going with the Spark for this one. Next match is the Chengdu Hunters against the Shanghai Dragons. I honestly am very split on this one. Both of these teams are going to be playing 4 matches this weekend, which is a lot, and I think that by the time you get to Saturday, both of these teams are going to be somewhat exhausted. I think there's going to be an element of just kind of playing to your strengths. I think Chengdu and Shanghai both have looked pretty good with Genji players on the roster. I think Who Are You has actually looked pretty good so far this season. I was impressed by the way he looked when they played the Fusion. I thought that was their best look against the Fusion that Huryu was in. And so for me, this match has the potential to be pretty close because Chengdu just kind of knows what they are. Shanghai, knowing what Chengdu likes to play, could be, you know, a team that successfully kind of counterpicks it. I still think the Shanghai Dragons look to be one of the top teams in this region. I still think they are probably the second best team in the league, or at least in this region. And I think when all is said and done, they'll still be one of the elite teams. But they right now look a little lost. Like the tank switches were kind of strange. I don't really know exactly what they want to do. And Chengdu knows exactly what their identity is. They're very one-dimensional. And I think the Shanghai Dragons will take it ultimately. I think it'll be a 3-2. I would honestly not even be surprised if the Dragons take it 3-0 or 3-1. I'm just a little weirded out by the Shanghai Dragons right now and think they have had some just questionable looks and I don't really know what they're going to do, and so I'm going to go their favor, yes, but I think it'll be close, 3-2. Final APAC match on Saturday is the Philadelphia Fusion versus the LA Valiant. Look, I don't know what to expect. The Fusion, once again, much like the Hunters and the Dragons, are playing 4 games this weekend. It's a lot of matches. That means there will be quite a bit of kind of exhaustion, I think. I think the end of the week is going to be tough for these teams, the second half of the week in particular. So there's a chance the Valiant could steal this win. I think the Valiant have looked improved. I think they've looked good. Yes, they're a little one-dimensional in that tank role, and that could cause some problems, but I've been very impressed by Dia so far this season, and I think Becky has been pretty good as well. MN3 and Zest definitely are better talents right now. They've looked almost, you know, one of the best DPS duos in the league right now. And so I think the Fusion will win this one. But because of, you know, factors outside of their control, such as the amount of games they're playing this weekend, and I just think the Valiant have looked pretty improved so far. I think it'll be a close series. I'm going to give it to the Fusion, though, 3-2. Very much easily could be a huge win for the Fusion, but the Valiant impressed me enough this past weekend that I feel like they are destined to do something this weekend that will surprise people. Moving on to the Western region, the London Spitfire take on the Atlanta Reign. Don't think it'll be particularly close. Reign look to be much better than the Spitfire do. Yes, the Reign struggled against the Justice, but I don't think they're going to struggle against the Spitfire, and I think the Reign take the series 3-0. They have a little more flexibility in their identity, I think. The Spitfire obviously want to run Rush and want to run Hottie, and the Reign will match them on that or play something else that I think will just works better. So I think the Reign take this one 3-0. Pretty easy win for them. Houston Outlaws versus the Paris Eternal. I'm not a huge fan of what Houston has been looking like and what they're doing with basically just running Dante on Doomfist all the time, but I think that they look better than the Eternal do. I think the Eternal are close to getting it together. Like I said earlier, I would have loved if they held on to Naga and also had Wub. I think that that was the kind of one biggest area where I thought this Eternal roster needed to make an improvement, was to strengthen their DPS line by adding a third piece. They opted to instead just go with one piece, new, and getting rid of Naga. So, you know, it is what it is. But I do think the Outlaws still have a quite large and sizable advantage over the Eternal in this series, and so I'm going to give it to the Outlaws 3-0. And the final Western Region match on Saturday is the Washington Justice against the Florida Mayhem. I think this will be a very good series. I think both of these teams look pretty good. Justice's loss to Boston definitely raises some questions about where this roster is currently at. You would think that that is not the type of result they would get, but unfortunately they did not look very good when they played the Uprising. The Mayhem have looked pretty good. I mean, they rolled New York last week, which I don't think is too impressive. To me, this really comes down to who I have more faith in what they've done so far this season. Yes, the Justice lost to the Boston Uprising, but the Justice also managed to beat an Atlanta Reign team that we feel good about, and a Toronto Defiant team that we feel good about. I think their results speak for themselves more. I think that they have way more potential than the Mayhem do. I think their ceiling is higher. And I think after what happened with them against Boston, they will make changes, they will make adaptations, and I think they will take the series from the Mayhem. It'll be close. This is really the one that determines whether or not I fully sell all my Justice stonks, but I'm going to go Justice win this series by a score of 3-2. Finally, with Sunday, we open up with the APAC matches, Shanghai Dragons versus the Seoul Dynasty. What a rivalry they have developed over the past couple of seasons, and the Shanghai Dragons have basically owned it the entire time. I think it'll be close. I think the Shanghai Dragons are the better looking team right now, though I don't think Seoul looks bad. They just have some question marks that we will have to see how they get answered as the season progresses. They're relatively inconsistent. That's kind of what they've been for the past 2 seasons. So I think there's a chance that the Dynasty surprise us and have a big performance here where they beat the Dragons, but I don't necessarily think it is likely. So I'm going to go with the Shanghai Dragons 3-2. I still think the Dynasty will keep it close, but I think ultimately the Dragons are the better team and they will take it away. Second APAC match on Sunday is the LA Valiant taking on the Chengdu Hunters. This is a spicy match. I think it has the potential to be pretty good. Like I said, the Valiant, I think, have looked much better as the week progressed last week, despite the fact they did not win a match. I still felt like they looked better from, day 1 to day 3. I thought they improved quite greatly. Chengdu, to me, super one-dimensional, and that worries me, because I don't really think they have the ability to change their DPS lineup very much in terms of what they even play. I think Jinmu is too limiting. I think that is the same problem I have with New York. Is you have a DPS line that's too limiting, a player who can't do enough to really get your team in a position where they're successful. If the meta's right, they are really, really good. If the meta's not right, they're going to struggle a bit. I don't know if the meta is in their favor exactly. Genji's pretty good, but we're seeing a lot of Tracer, and we're seeing quite a bit of Soldier 76, and they can't run both of those things at the same time, which I think is concerning. So despite the fact that I think the Hunters are on paper a better team, right now I think the Valiant are more flexible and actually look like they can adapt to what the Hunters are doing better than the Hunters could adapt to what the Valiant are doing. And so I'm actually going to give this series to the LA Valiant by a score of 3-2. I just feel more confident right now in the Valiant's ability to make changes and adapt. I don't think the Hunters have any real ability to do that. And so for me, Valiant, big surprise for me, probably big upset game for me this week is the Valiant beating the Hunters 3-2. Final APAC match of the weekend is the Hangzhou Spark against Philadelphia Fusion. This one has the potential to be a banger of a match. I think Sunday in the APAC region looks really, really good. This is really where we will know how good the Fusion are. I genuinely think it is unlikely that the Fusion finish this tournament winning all of their games, right? I think it's unlikely. I think one of these Fusion games they will lose. I think the Spark game is probably the one with the highest potential for them to lose, because the Spark will have had, a day off on Friday where they can kind of prepare for this game. They'll have played the Shards the day before. It's not a super tough opponent. So there's a possibility that they kind of beat the Fusion here. And the Fusion, eventually, people are going to figure them out. People are going to kind of figure out what it is they do best. But I don't think I'm willing to take that risk and say that the Fusion are going to lose this game in particular. They'll probably lose one of these games. One of them I'll probably predict wrong. Like I said, they have to play the Dynasty, and they have to play the Valiant, and they have to play the Spark, all teams I feel pretty good about, and the Hunters, who I think have looked pretty good. But ultimately, I think the Fusion are, right now, the stronger team. I think right now they look to be the better, more competent opponent, and I think that they will take the series against the Spark, but it'll be close. It'll be a 3-2 in the favor of the Philadelphia Fusion. Finally, for North America, 2 matches. Dallas Fuel take on the Boston Uprising. This won't even be close. Dallas Fuel are significantly better than the Boston Uprising, and the Fuel just keep looking better and better. Their Zarya composition looks like it might be the best in the league. It is incredible how well they look with the Zarya. Hanbin has just been absolutely on fire for this team, and so I think that there is a very, very good chance that they take this series relatively easily over the Boston Uprising. Boston, yeah, they got a win over the Justice, and it was kind of surprising. I don't expect it happening again. I'm going with the Dallas Fuel taking the series 3-0. Final match of the weekend is my second big pick game. It is the Atlanta Reign taking on the LA Gladiators. What a rivalry these two teams had last season. One of the most impressive kind of displays. The Reign won most of them, though the Gladiators did come out on top when it mattered most in the Countdown Cup, though arguably in the playoffs it didn't. go their way, and maybe that was the one that mattered the most. I think this will be a fun match to watch. I think these are two interesting teams, especially when you kind of consider where they're at. The Gladiators have had 2 heartbreaking losses back-to-back. The Reign kind of got smacked by the Justice and bounced back against a relatively weak opponent this past weekend, where you kind of feel like you don't know exactly where these two teams are right now. It's kind of tough to say for sure who looks to be kind of on top in this region between these two teams. So I think it'll be a close game. Really comes down to, I think, if the Gladiators can clean up some of these issues they've had with coordination, making some kind of late mistakes that kind of turn matches in the favor of the other team. That is really the thing that will ultimately determine whether or not this team manages to win this series. But I've seen more from the Gladiators that has impressed me. The Reign's loss to the Justice really does stick with me as a sticking point, where the Reign are still trying to figure out who they are. The Gladiators know what works for them. They just haven't necessarily gotten it fully together. After these past 2 weekends, though, I still think that they are the better team. Despite everything that has happened, despite some of the rough things they've had to go through over the past week, losing some heartbreaking matches to the Fuel and the Shock, I still think they're the better team, and I think they will take this series 3-2 over the Atlanta Reign. So there you go. Those are my picks. I'll throw the whole list of them up here so you can see them. This is a tough weekend. I think there's going to be a lot of things that surprise us just because it's a long weekend, lots of games, lots of teams that play a number of games. With 3 teams in the APAC region playing 4 games, one of them is bound to not go their way just as a result of that, especially when you have 2 of them actually playing against each other, with the Hunters and the Fusion both playing each other when they both play 4 games. And the Dragons and the Hunters also playing 4 games and playing each other, so it'll be interesting to see what happens, but we will see with time. But that's going to be it for me for this one. If you enjoyed this video or like in the future, consider liking and subscribing, as your support does help out the channel a bunch. And if you want more videos like this in the future, comment down below your kind of thoughts on this and what you want to see more of, and maybe we will get it done. But that's going to be all for me for today. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time. Bye-bye.